If the cops and prosecutors inside the system were suppressed, and the mainstream media was gagged by PR firms, who was left to shake this massive tree? The actual turning point finally arrived in 2017. Fueled by the rise of the nationwide anti-sexual harassment movement, Julie K. Brown, an investigative reporter for the Miami Herald known for championing marginalized voices, decided to reopen this decade-old cold case. In the media climate of that time, this was essentially a thankless, solitary crusade. Brown's investigation faced colossal hurdles. Restricted by NDAs and court sealing orders, huge chunks of the core case files were heavily redacted. The real names, addresses, and crucial details of those involved were completely blacked out. The trail of clues seemed entirely cut off. To break through this information blockade, Brown used the most stubborn and grueling method possible. She spent a full 18 months cross-referencing thousands of pages of public and semi-public documents. Staring at heavily redacted files, she acted like a human microscope, looking for half-visible names or birth dates that the censors missed. Then, she turned to Facebook, cross-referencing the friend lists of victims on social media to accurately track down the real identities of about 80 potential victims. When it came to making contact, Brown showed incredible professional sensitivity. She knew exactly how deeply these victims had been traumatized by years of PI harassment and wiretaps, making them highly suspicious of phone calls and emails. So, Brown went with the most old-school but safest method: handwritten letters. To avoid re-traumatizing these women, she consulted experts before even picking up a pen to learn how to properly communicate with severe trauma survivors. This highly professional and genuine approach finally won the victims over. Michelle was the first to break the silence, quickly followed by Courtney, Virginia, and other key witnesses. They sat down in front of Brown's camera for interviews. Brown didn't just get first-hand testimony. She got her hands on crucial physical evidence, like the original photograph of Virginia with Prince Andrew and Ghislaine Maxwell. 10 years after the justice system stalled out, investigative journalism miraculously managed to close the loop on the witness evidence, dragging the buried truth back up to the surface. Julie Brown took the results of her 18-month investigation and fused them into a devastating series of in-depth reports. On November 28, 2018, the Miami Herald officially published the earthquake-inducing 10,000-word series, Perversion of Justice. This report was bulletproof when it came to the facts. First, it detailed exactly how Epstein's pyramid scheme recruitment network operated in Palm Beach and on his private island, letting the public see firsthand the industrialized scale of his sexual exploitation. Second, the entire piece exposed the backroom dealings of Alexander Acosta, the federal prosecutor who signed the non-prosecution agreement and later became the U.S. Secretary of Labor, pointing the finger directly at judicial corruption. Third, it named several political and business accomplices who had been hiding behind the immunity clause of that agreement for years, ripping away the elite class's fig leaf. The relentless effort of a lone warrior had finally torn a hole in the darkness, and with that, the light of justice sparked a chain reaction. The moment the story dropped, it shattered the media's spiral of silence that had lasted for years. Faced with airtight evidence, Epstein's PR machine totally collapsed. Within a very short window, 32 mainstream U.S. outlets, including the New York Times and the Washington Post, completely piled on the story. The massive media tsunami instantly morphed into intense political pressure. Under relentless public interrogation, Labor Secretary Acosta, the powerful figure who pushed the original deal, was forced to resign from the president's cabinet. A flood of new journalistic leads and public outrage forced the U.S. justice system to act. While the Florida justice system was blocked by jurisdictional hurdles due to the old agreement, the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York, SDNY, stepped in aggressively. The SDNY prosecutors were bold. They argued that Epstein had also committed crimes at his Manhattan mansion, and importantly, these crimes continued after the 2008 non-prosecution agreement. By doing this, New York prosecutors successfully bypassed the restrictions of the old deal and launched an independent investigation with fresh jurisdiction. A desperate counterattack, dormant for 12 years, had officially begun. After 6 months of meticulous planning, in 2019, New York prosecutors and the FBI launched a zero-warning precision takedown. This time, there were no moles leaking info beforehand, and no politicians stepping in to mediate. On July 6, 2019, as Epstein confidently flew back from overseas and touched down at Teterboro Airport in New Jersey, FBI agents waiting on the tarmac arrested him on the spot. Simultaneously, the FBI executed a search warrant conducting a top-to-bottom raid of Epstein's 7-story mansion on Manhattan's Upper East Side. During the raid, agents literally sawed open a hidden safe. Inside, they found not only a massive stash of private photos and CDs of underage girls, but they also seized the infamous Little Black Book, a directory containing the direct phone numbers of thousands of political and business elites. And that wasn't all. The safe also held stacks of cash, loose diamonds, and a fake passport. After his arrest, Epstein was transferred to the Metropolitan Correctional Center in Manhattan. During the subsequent bail hearing, his deep-pocketed defense attorneys offered a staggering $100 million bail package, suggesting Epstein wear a GPS monitor and pay out of pocket for armed private security while under house arrest in his Manhattan mansion. But the judge sharply denied it. First, the defendant had access to a massive fleet of private aircraft and huge overseas assets, making him an extreme flight risk. Second, his history of hiring private investigators to severely tamper with witnesses proved he was an ongoing threat to the victims. Denying bail meant Epstein's ability to operate outside the law was entirely severed. Even more brutally real, facing the risk of all this evidence going public, the very elites and former VIP guests who frequently popped up in his flight logs, and Black Book showed the coldest, most ruthless speed of capitalism. They went dead silent, releasing overnight statements to sever all ties. Nobody wanted to vouch for a prisoner who had lost his utility and was about to trigger a tsunami. The political and corporate moat Epstein had spent decades building evaporated instantly. He became a truly isolated man. Just as the entire world was gearing up for the trial of the century, hoping to uproot the massive, tangled web of political and financial elites behind him, something unexpected happened. Before dawn on August 10, 2019, Jeffrey Epstein was found dead in his cell at the Metropolitan Correctional Center in New York. This facility was touted as having the highest security level in the country, known for holding major felons and terrorists. His death was incredibly convenient. All legal actions immediately halted, and all cross-examination was permanently sealed. However, according to a U.S. poll, 46% of Americans believe Epstein is still alive. 33% believe he was murdered. Only 3% believe the official conclusion. Why do people think this? First, the coincidental failure of both surveillance and manpower. Just weeks before the incident, Epstein had supposedly survived a suicide attempt. Yet, on the night he died, he was bafflingly removed from the 24-hour suicide watch list. Meanwhile, his cellmate had been temporarily transferred out just prior. The 2 guards on duty that night happened to fall asleep at the same time and falsified their logbooks, and the security cameras happened to experience technical malfunctions. Multiple security protocols failing simultaneously is incredibly hard to brush off as mere negligence. contradictions in the physical evidence only fueled the murder theories. Even though the official chief medical examiner insisted the cause of death was suicide by hanging, a forensic pathologist hired by Epstein's family found during the autopsy that the location and nature of the fractures in his hyoid bone were medically highly indicative of homicide, such as strangulation. Having two entirely different conclusions drawn from one body sent conspiracy theories into overdrive. Even more chilling were leaked documents pointing to a faked death and swap theory. Someone claiming to be a prison guard posted on a forum that Epstein had actually been moved hours before the incident, and what was left in the cell was merely a body double. An individual who could mobilize infinite funds, wielded top-tier counterintelligence tactics, and held the dark secrets of countless elites. In a federal cell, was it really suicide? Was he silenced? Or did he pull off a vanishing act? Everything seems to be intentionally or unintentionally dissolved in a soup of contradictions. The only certainty is that his death secured absolute safety for a very long list of Washington and Wall Street 5 IPs. Dead men tell no tales. Is this really the final ending? Not exactly. Epstein's sudden death meant he could never face a public trial in a courtroom. But this 12-year battle, with its life and death reversals, was absolutely not meaningless. This war didn't just rip the hypocritical masks off the elite, it tore away the fig leaf covering the entire American judicial system and society. The so-called system was never benevolent, and it never truly self-corrected. It was bought out by capital from the very beginning, infiltrated by power, and reduced to an accomplice and a protective moat. During those suffocating 12 years, the forces that actually cracked the darkness and dragged the monster off his pedestal were never some grand institution. It was the ordinary people who stubbornly fought in the dark. Local detective Joseph Recaré, who, while facing stalking and threats from private eyes, refused to bow his head and fought to the death to protect the original case files. Assistant U.S. Attorney Marie Villafagna, who, trapped in a hopeless situation by the dirty deals between her boss and the elites, withstood crushing pressure to permanently nail the unalterable flight and financial evidence into the archives. Investigative journalist Julie K. Brown, who spent 18 grueling months sifting through systematically redacted garbage files, piecing together the buried truth with old-school handwritten letters, and using the power of the press to force a deliberately deaf system to listen. But the greatest heroes in this shadow war are the victims who chose to step forward, even when they were smeared and cyber-bullied. Maria, Virginia, Courtney, Michelle, carrying their trauma, using their real names, showing their real faces, and exposing their bleeding scars. They carried the weight of justice that the law and the system were supposed to bear. This battle is an anthem to the courage of ordinary people. It declares to the world, when the system rots and the power of capital blocks out the sun, it is personal conviction, human conscience, and fury against injustice that stand as the world's final, most unbreakable line of defense.